Hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming along. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what we've done with USRowing and the 77,000 members across the organization and across the states that we've started to roll out some learning programs for, and hopefully give you guys some actual tangibles to take away with you in terms of like implementation plans and all sorts of other things. But what I might start first with is, Rich, if I could get you to intro yourself.
Sure.
And what you guys do over at USRowing.
Great. So everybody, my name is Rich Cacioppo. I'm Executive Director at USRowing. USRowing is the national governing body for the sport in the US. And for those of you who don't know what that really means, the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee oversees roughly 50 sports in the US, and those national governing bodies, they do two main things. It's a pretty broad charter. They send athletes to the Olympic and Paralympic Games, and they support all grassroots efforts for the sport in the United States. So we do both the high performance side of the sport of rowing and also the day-to-day rowers around the country. Our almost 80,000 members now and our 1,400 member organizations as well.
Awesome. And my name is Blake Proberts. I'm the founder over at Acorn LMS, or PLMS. And what we work to do is we link learning and performance together. And why I thought that we probably have no more perfect guest than the team at USRowing is, if you want the epitome of high performance, go and look at athletes on that caliber and that scale. And I think they've managed to do some really cool and really unique things over there. So today what we wanted to do is more have like a little bit of a discussion, a little bit of an informal chat with Rich and get him to share some of the learnings that they've taken away during the program that they've launched. And we were going to start with just some learning challenges. And so maybe if we just start with, what were your goals for the program and what actually led you down the pathway to what you have accomplished today?
Yeah, so when we think about these challenges, I'll take a step back and talk a little bit about where USRowing has been over the past few years. So over the past decade, the nature of governing bodies, what's required of them to actually deliver against their missions, has become increasingly challenging for a variety of reasons. The professionalization required within the organization, the standardization of experience, and the observability of what members, athletes, coaches are all doing has really transformed the space over the past decade. So when we think about our value proposition, especially for the grassroots of the sport, we really kind of, as I say, took it down to the studs, right? What do we offer as day-to-day value for our members? How does that drive our mission, both across performance, experience, and inclusion? And then what are the value propositions, the areas that we really want to focus on? And we aligned as part of this that learning and development is critical, both because we think it furthers people's experience with the sport and it also helps us govern effectively. So the first challenge that we experience there is, to grow and sustain our sport in this new world that we live in, we had to have better trained coaches, clubs, better informed and empowered athletes, and we had to be able to do that at scale. So to do that, you kind of need to earn the right to grow. And so that was part of what really drove the focus on learning and development. The second challenge that we had was, because our sport has been very diffuse and decentralized across the United States, it was very hard for there to be standardized content, learning and development goals, and really a consistent message for all of our diverse stakeholders across the sport. And the third one that we had was, obviously, in this new world where we had to really professionalize, become sustainable as an organization, we also had to think about scale and sustainability. So we had to think about, I talk a lot about people, process, and technology, and how do you use the latter two in order to, as I'll say, like move hands off the wheel and use technology, but then make the most of the time that you have for those human interactions. And a big piece of that with learning and development as well was personalization. So especially with a community that's very used to sort of the mom and pop experience, just the face-to-face interactions, if you're going to deliver something with technology, it has to be human and it has to feel personal to them. So those are the three main challenges that we kind of confronted once we identified L&D as one of our core value props for the future.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you guys have a really broad audience with several different layers of cohorts. Mm-hmm. Can you maybe explain a little bit about the different levels of membership within USRowing? There's coaches, there's athletes, there's all sorts of different people. What do those audiences look like?
Yeah, so one thing that is unique about our sport compared to many other in the US is that the members that we serve are from 13 to in their 90s. So half of our member base are youth athletes and the other half are adult athletes competing all the way through the rest of their life. So that's a distinct challenge but opportunity for us to manage those different segments and stakeholders effectively. We then also, of course, have 8,000 plus coaches, 1,400 clubs, and when you think about our sport has high barriers to entry. cost, geography, perception, right? It also is a very demanding sport in a lot of ways. So when you think about how we actually need to address these stakeholders, we need to find a way to meet them where they are, but at the same time drive consistency. So it's this push-pull constantly of how are we respecting, empathizing, and supporting and delivering value to these members that are very different in a lot of ways, and while at the same time making sure that our consistent mission, message, and priorities are delivered to them on a daily basis. And that's a really big challenge, but also a really big opportunity if you can crack that code.
And maybe now that we've talked a bit about some of the challenges you've had, what was the solution that you've decided to come to? So obviously we've worked a little bit together, but there's a lot more than just the platform within a learning solution to such a broad audience of people. What are some of the solutions that you've found and sort of undertaken that have yielded the results that you have today?
Yeah, well, I think we'll talk a little bit more about this throughout, but there's also this healthy tension between the quality of an experience and the iteration required in the test and learn in order to figure out what actually works. And if you think a lot about sporting communities in the US, especially governing bodies, there is a need to deliver experiences that are high quality, clear, especially when attention spans are low and it's hard to cut through that noise. But at the same time, especially as a nonprofit that's scarcely resourced, the ability to do all the research in the world and figure out exactly what's going to work is low. So you have to start building trust in your community that you can test and learn together and experiment together. So if you're doing that, you need a solution that is going to be not just drive confidence and credibility from a platform perspective, but also facilitate the experimentation that's needed. So another piece of that, especially when it's technology, is how do you present that to your community? So as you'll note, we've called our platform the Launch, and the Launch is actually the boat that accompanies shells that are rowing down the river. So instead of just saying, hey, log into this platform, we created a branded experience, one, to try to help drive that credibility and that affinity, and two, because if it's something that feels like it's not just a technology product that's standalone, but feels like it's part of the community, our hypothesis that ultimately would drive more buy-in. And we did find that over time. The second one here is really about attention span, and I think we all face that in our daily lives, right? I know I face it with myself. When you think about how do you actually reach people, you need flexibility to try different ways of reaching your members, your stakeholders, your learners. And so what we really set out to begin with is say, look, if we try to do a traditional approach of just long form content, it is not going to work. How do we think about ways about making content modular, go in and out of it, and then make sure that you have something you can take away and be actionable with immediately after. It's this idea of it's not just a consumption experience, it's an integrated experience that is not just interactive but then has takeaways, but you need to be able to do that in bite-sized chunks as well. And then we talked a little bit earlier about how we have a very diverse group of stakeholders in our space. When we think about the concept of cohorts, as Acorn works on that, and you think about this feeling of personalization at scale, an example of that would be our referees, our officials. They have content that they don't want anybody else to see that's specifically related to officiating. So the idea of having content that is segmented and personalized based on your roles and permissions or your tags or who you are in the community is really critical, while at the same time making sure that we want broad access to general content. So this idea of having the right sort of segments of content and who it's delivered to is really critical for us.
And given that you've sort of created this solution now, what's next? What's next on the cards, and where what you've described around cohorts and sort of the launch, what's your next solution, and what's the next evolution of USRowing's program look like?
Yeah, so let me first say is when we kind of took it back to the basics with our member value proposition, it used to be that, and many governing bodies do that, you have an individual membership that you pay every year, and you've got a bullet point list of all of these value props, right? Primary value props for a governing body in the grassroots is really risk mitigation, right, for the grassroots of the sport so that people can participate and have governance and support of the body. But beyond that, we had a lot of sort of like, here's this marketing program as a bullet point that you can use. And we were really focused on just direct athlete and member engagement, individual member engagement. What we decided to do is kind of scrap that and say, we're going to first start with our member organizations, our 1,400 clubs. That is the infrastructure required to build a sustainable sport. So we started with clubs. Now we've transitioned to our coaches, who are the closest to our athletes day in, day out. And now our next step is really starting to build a compelling value prop for every individual athlete at USRowing. So we're taking our high performance athlete toolkit, everything that we're doing for our athletes that were just in Paris this past summer, and we're making that accessible and applicable to day-to-day athletes as well. So that's one of our next steps. The other one is, when I talked about us focusing on our clubs first, Blake, that's all been modules that have kind of been put together working backwards from what our club said their biggest challenges were. So I talked earlier about how it's impossible to really know what's going to hit when you go live and launch something, but we really did try to work back from our customers here and say, what are the priority modules and challenges that our clubs face? And we really worked backwards from that and been knocking those out over the past year plus now. Next step from there, and you'll see this on the next slide, I believe, the original name for the launch was something called Club in a Box. The idea is that you could just say, I want to start a rowing program in a city that doesn't have one, and we could hand somebody a playbook and a set of learning experiences that would enable them to do that. And so what we've been working on has been building all those modules. The next step is to bring that all together in sort of an aggregated product to deliver to our community.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's so empowering, and it's such a cool thing because it's so community driven. When we got the opportunity to present at DevLearn, we sort of had a discussion around what we thought attendees like yourselves might want to see and sort of talk about. And one of the things that we find that comes up a lot at Acorn is, what does my implementation plan actually look like? What are the metrics? How do I work these things out? This is the first time our organization has ever done something like this. Are you able to talk the audience through a little bit around what your implementation was, some of those challenges, and sort of how you overcame them? Have you maybe pivoted? Obviously things changed, the brand new program.
Yeah, so I think, if any of you just saw Kara Swisher when I say this, I worked in big tech for a while, and I'm pretty much simpatico with like 95% of what she said. But I do have a background in software product management and spent a lot of time in this space. And one of the most critical things here is to, as I said, work backwards from the customer, don't work backwards from the technology, right? So if you're thinking about a partnership and you're looking to partner with, really make sure that you've spent the time and that you've aligned within your own organization around what are our customer needs, what are our priorities, and often that's as much about what you say no to as what you say yes to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's really critical to start with before you go into what is the point solution that's going to deliver this. It's really understanding those needs. And then the next one here is, we talked about this a little bit already, the priority topics for a while to small group, building that credibility through experimentation. By sequencing the work that we did with our stakeholder bases, we were able to earn some more of that credibility quicker and learn and have a feedback loop, right? Anything that we do here, we really need to make sure that we're getting member feedback, that we're adjusting, and that any solution that we have is flexible enough so that we can tweak and pivot over time. A big thing for us is this idea of observability, right? I think so often, especially in governing bodies over the years, nobody actually knew what was going on because there was no data platform. There was very little to actually give you a signal other than things that were anecdotal. So the ability to be data-driven with this, while not losing sort of the cultural piece of it and the emotional piece of it, is really critical. And then as far as goals, so I think about initial launch, 3 sort of categories of goals. The first one was ship the thing as close to on time as you can. And I know that sounds like, it needs to be right, and you hold it until it's right, but in order for us to do this, there's a broader conversation, at least within our organization. So as a governing body and an organization that, scarce resources, broad charter, there was not a lot of trust that we could actually land a plane, right? That we could do the thing and deliver it when we said we were going to do it. So Chris Furlow, who's here, who leads our learning and development team, started off here as a single-threaded owner for this project. So he woke up every morning and all he did was get this out the door and get it ready to get out the door. So for an organization, you got to pick what is the most important things to be working on, and then make sure that you've got somebody who wakes up every morning, that's all they do, right? And most organizations can't afford to do more than 2 or 3 of those at one time. We could only afford to do 1 at the time, but I think that was a really critical goal. The next goal was make sure that when the platform launches and we get this out there, that it's durable, reliable, and even if the content is really not hitting or it's missing the mark where we have to tweak it, make sure that the platform is solid enough not to burn that trust up front, especially with a community that's less engaged with technology generally, especially we have 50% of our members who are adult rowers, and many of them are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, right? We wanted them to make sure that, hey, technology can be scary for us. How do you make sure that the platform's durability, right, does not get in the way of building that trust? And the third one is obviously when you think about your key results and ultimately your KPIs, that's where it's kind of a shot in the dark. Like, and we didn't get it right on what we predicted for engagement up front. The key thing there is that observability to know what it is, and then you have to give yourself some time, right? And I think that's the hardest thing because everybody wants to move quickly. I'm happy to say that we've really made a lot of progress over the past year, but the most important thing on that, and we talked about this earlier, Blake, was if you instrument the metrics up front and you know what you're measuring, don't worry so much about whether you're hitting those initial marks, get your baseline, but make sure you have the instrumentation because that's the prerequisite to knowing how well you're doing in the future anyway.
And with your implementation, obviously USRowing, really big audience, going out to 77,000 members and people throughout the States. In terms of internally though, who did you really find help support that launch and that implementation, who's maybe not directly within your L&D team, and what were some of the resources internally that you leveraged to run through that process and implement this program?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's, I think a lot of folks kind of figure if I check all these boxes, if I do all this work, if I've got an idea that I think is good, that's all it takes. The human piece of this, the moving hearts and minds piece, is critical in any organization, right? For us, it really came back to making sure that people were with us along the journey on like, why are we focusing on this? Getting feedback, making sure they were part of the experience as we do that working backwards process and understand like, why are we prioritizing this? You have to really kind of like separate the people from the problem in the sense where you need to say, poke holes at this, right? We want you on board. So, luckily USRowing right now is about 45 full-time employees, right? So the process here was really engaging that cross-functional team throughout. Here's what we're trying to do. Let's get everybody aligned on that. Once you get to that point, it's really about ensuring that across the leadership team, right, and then with your board, that everybody's convicted and bought in, right? Because those priorities don't really matter until things get hard, right? It's very easy for people to check boxes, oh, this sounds great, let's do this thing, when it's all written down on paper. The first time there's a hiccup, or the first time that you really have to say, okay, we've got to adjust or pivot, if you have not already gotten the buy-in and really gotten people to commit to what something looks like and be passionate about it, or even if they have a disagree and commit moment, they at least know that the team that's driving it has done the work. That is really essential, especially when it comes to technology projects, in organizations for which that's typically foreign, like ours.
Awesome. And so post-implementation, what are some of those benefits that you've sort of seen throughout the different audiences? What are you hearing from your customer? And what are the things that you see as being the foundations to build on going forwards with releasing Club in a Box and those other aspirational sort of programs that you're looking to roll out?
Yeah, so I mean, we found kind of three segments of sort of learners and members of our community when it's come to this. As you see here from this member of our community, you're going to have a subset that they're diehards. No matter what you launch, they're going to do it. They're going to say, I'm going to take every course, every single module. I'm committed. I'm a believer. They're going to do everything, right? That's a great group to start gaining feedback from. But you also want to make sure that the other two groups that we found were one on the other end of the spectrum. Those are like, why do I have to do this stuff, right? The only L&D that we really had in the past were coach certifications and then referee certifications, right? Yeah. And as we've moved both to those being required across our sport and then trying to move into optional curricula and things just to help you learn and grow through the sport, that's a very different dynamic. So we've got on the other end of the spectrum, the folks who are sort of like, I don't need to do this, I don't need to touch that. We still have to work on that group. The really compelling, interesting group where I think there's the meatiest learnings from are those who maybe didn't hear about it at first or maybe were a little bit hesitant. They give it a try, and that's where you get your most actionable feedback, right? I call it like the messy middle of your customer base to understand that. So one of the challenges that we found initially as we were trying to build up adoption was the marketing and communications of any program like this is critical. One of the things that we really struggled with over the years is cutting through that noise and really having effective go-to-market strategies so that we can reach different segments and really have what I call like a rolling thunder approach. And so that's one of the things that was a really good learning for us that we've taken in other projects, knowing just how difficult it is to cut through that noise and get in front of people. So as you think about implementations in your own sort of potential segments, I would encourage you to all ensure that you've got a really solid marketing and go-to-market plan for this. Otherwise, it's going to take much longer for you to get that sort of meaningful signal on the success of what you've launched.
And given you've got such different audiences and you're achieving, benefits for different members within the organization, have you encountered any areas of potential conflict, where, so we spoke earlier today and you sort of mentioned there's training for referees, and the referees might not necessarily want certain athletes or the athletic team to see how they're trained, and there's other areas within the club that there might be some conflict. Did you have any challenges trying to sort of accommodate all of those different audiences?
I mean, I think one of the primary challenges that we face is that all of our L&D was distributed on multiple platforms, right? So part of this was an aggregation exercise, and because our referees had their own platform because they were running it themselves, right? So I would say the challenge was a little bit of the who moved my cheese, right? Because suddenly all of these learning and development opportunities were distributed that had all these independent owners, and we were bringing it together. And even when you're explaining the why behind that and trying to bring people along, it's a change, right? Because suddenly us as the governing body have this overview on a consistent experience around learning and development. So I think that was the first challenge. As far as like the availability and the access of the training, that's been less of an issue. I expect that that's probably going to grow more as we move from clubs and coaches now to athletes, and in the future, parents of youth athletes. As we start trying to educate parents about what is a healthy amount of training volume for a 15 or 16-year-old, right? How does that relate to what a coach in a program is doing? There's some natural conflict there. Short-term potential challenges, but long-term, I think we have conviction that shining a light on this and that transparency is really the best thing for our sport and for everybody in our community. But we have to be really respectful and empathetic of our members who have had much different experiences with our organization and L&D over the years.
We actually got the USRowing implementation plan. We've put it on a QR code here. If you want it, just scan the QR code. You can download that. We want to give you something to take away that was quite tangible and something you can actually action within your organization. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.